What unethical thing did your boss ask you to do? My old boss at Dollar Tree would make me drive her to the bank in my car every night, and she would have me park like 10 feet back from the ATM. While she walked up to it, she told me that if someone ever tried to run up on her while she was depositing the money, I had to run them over. She said if they were too close to her to just hit her as well. She was incredibly adamant that I absolutely had to do this, and very serious. First job after I graduated college. Boss called me into his office and had me sit next to his daughter while she took an online exam. Told me to make sure she passed it. She definitely wouldn't have passed if I wasn't in the room. Keep people at work when there was a chemical leak from the car painting shop next door and people were getting sick. The boss wasn't on site. Almost never was. I tried calling him and got no answer, and I was the most senior worker on site. So I sent everyone home. When I was almost home, 1H plus commute, he called me back. He had gotten my voicemail where I explained the situation, and he was not happy. Apparently we should have waited it out, or I should have arranged for everyone to work from home. Not possible. The guy was a dickhead, but this one still makes me angry when I think about it. When I was 16, I worked at Spencer's in the mall. The store manager was a middle-aged female who found out she was being demoted. She made the decision to instead quit. Her last day I happened to be closing the store with her. Nothing weird. We had done it many times before. After everything was closed and locked up, we were punching out in the back room. I went to open the door that led back into the store, and she physically put her hand over it and closed it like a scene from a movie. Then she said, "You know I make schedules, right?" I said, "Yeah, I understand that." She said, "Do you think it's a coincidence that you and I are closing my last day? This is your opportunity to do anything that you want with me." I was so uncomfortable and I didn't know what to do. So I gave her a hug and she said, "Really, that's it?" All the while her husband and 2 kids were waiting in the car outside the mall to pick her up. When I was a teenager, I worked at a doctor's office after school, and during the summers, the doctor was a total a-hole. But for whatever reasons he liked me and was nice to me, and the pay was really good. Because he was an a-hole, there was a lot of turnover in the office. This was 30 years ago now, so it was when you put ads in the paper to hire people. So he would put ads in the paper to hire office staff, and he had a separate phone number that he'd list in the ad for people to call. He told me that only I should answer the line, and when I took down the applicant's name and number, one should mark candidates that sounded black with an asterisk, as he didn't want to hire blacks. This was in 1989, not 1949. He'd done a lot of very questionable things during my time there, but this one took the cake. I didn't say a word though. I got tons of calls for the ad the first day it ran, and didn't mark an asterisk next to any names at all. Just wrote down the names and numbers. At the end of the day, he asks if we got any calls, and I said, "Yes, quite a few. Here's the list." He looks it over and goes, "You didn't mark any of these." I just looked at him coyly and said, "Gee, I didn't really know what you meant by sounded black, and it's just really hard to tell that over a phone call." So I just took the names and numbers. I could tell he was PICE'd, but didn't say a word. Ironically, he ended up hiring a black woman for one of the office positions, and she ended up working there for several years. Weird. My dad worked at a small Midwestern bank as an executive. One day a fellow executive comes in with several loan applications and says he needs them all approved. My dad looks over them quickly and immediately realizes none of the applicants qualified. If they approved them, the loans would go into default within 3 months and these people would lose their farms. My dad said it wasn't possible. The other exec says, "Well, if you just fudge the numbers it is." My father tells him that's impossible because other exec never walked into his office and they never had this conversation. The other exec nods and takes the papers back. 6 months later the FBI raids the bank. My father was the only exec who didn't go to prison for fraud. I used to work in the bakery department of Sainsbury's as my first job when I turned 16. At first it was just stacking shelves, but eventually they wanted me to work in the bakery itself. They emphasized several times that under no circumstance was to use the bread slicer as I was not old enough. This lasted about a week until I was on the closing shift in the bakery on my own. The shift manager came in and started shouting at me about why I hadn't sliced all of the bread. I told him exactly what I had been told by my supervisor and another manager. He told me he doesn't care and that I couldn't finish work until it was done. This being my first job, I just agreed to do it. About 3 months later the machine developed a fault and it ended up likely electrocuting me. I raised the issue and put it into the accident book. When it was investigated, I was blamed by the manager as I shouldn't have been using the machine to begin with. When I reminded him that he was the one who told me to use it, he denied it and gave me a written warning. Once the machine had been fixed, he still expected me to use it. When I refused, he sent me home and didn't add me to the rota for another 3 weeks. I had to help my boss work at another store when I was working at a Ropestale. After we left the store, we stopped at some guy's house. She asked me to wait in the car and text her if anyone pulled up. I found out later she was having an affair with this married guy. This happened a bunch of times. I just thought it was a friend or something. She was going in there and having sex with this guy while I was the lookout. My boss had the Thursday afternoon off, but kept texting me. He had obviously been drinking as it was getting more persistent and inappropriate. I was trying to ignore it, but then he started asking why I wasn't answering him. I replied, I'm working. His response was, well, stop, lol. Honestly, 4 hours of nonsense like this along with innuendo, inappropriate gifs, etc. It would have been bad enough, but I was trying to get everything done as I had the next day, Friday, off. Friday morning I wake up to another text message, not email, which is the only form of communication we should be using. The text is a detailed description of a huge proposal I have to do for him in time for a presentation he has to deliver Monday. I was fuming. Why not ask yesterday when I was actually working? I remind him that I have the day off today. His reply is that I can just do it over the weekend. WTF. I cannot believe that he actively prevented me from working properly on a workday and then throws this as me once he's sobered up and wants to sabotage my weekend with it. This was years ago at my first job at a very well-known sandwich chain. During my first week there, my supervisor made me scrape the gum off of the sidewalks in front of the store with a dough scraper and said something along the lines of this is initiation or something like that. I thought they were joking at first, but they were dead serious. I just remember customers passing me on their way in and out while I was on the ground scraping away, then having my supervisor come out and point out the spots I missed or didn't get well enough. Felt super embarrassed and a little humiliated during and after. They thought it was funny. Back in a butcher shop portion of a grocery store I worked at, the supervisor asked me to change the date on some burger that wasn't selling. The day she asked me to do this was the sell by date. I even asked her if that was safe or legal. She just tapped her name tag that said supervisor on it and said that was the only thing I needed to worry about. I put new tags on all of the packages while she was there, but I didn't put them on the shelves. After she left for the night, I found the store manager and showed him. I showed him the old tags, which were just under the new tags, so it was easy to pull them back and prove it. He had me toss the burger down the trash chute and my supervisor was gone from the store by the end of the week. I used to work as an assistant manager for a certain fast food chain while I saved up money to go to college. The store's labor to sales percentage and breakdown was displayed on a large screen at the front of the store, and the store manager would download the data and monitor it often. The manager of the store would give hours and raises to his assistant managers based on how well we ran labor during our shifts. He would very often encourage us to work off the clock for a few hours and to have us ask some of the other employees to work during their breaks to drive labor costs down. This is far from the most unethical and crazy thing that happened there, but it's the most unethical thing that my boss asked me to do while I was there. Our boss asked the whole staff on Thursday if anyone wanted to work overtime over the weekend, hoping to complete an extra 500 orders, and if we completed said 500 orders, everyone would get a $500 bonus. I asked her what happens if we don't complete the 500 orders. She then said no one gets paid. So I said, so, in theory, we could complete 499 orders and we wouldn't get a dime. She said correct. I promptly turned their offer down and realized I was working for idiots. Late 1990s, when I got my first job at a movie theater. I got the job on recommendation of my friend who also worked there. My friend is Jewish and this will come into play in this retelling momentarily. Our boss had decided to tell me, after being frustrated by not just me, but my friend as well, for not doing the job of the older kids decided not to do, to quote tell that stupid wandering Jew to do his fine job. If that doesn't count as unethical, then I do not know what does. I did not, in fact, tell my friend, the aforementioned wandering Jew, to do his job. I walked back down and told him we actually need to quit. Trust me. Use the corporate credit card for unauthorized purchases. I had already been told by corporate that no, next time I would be in big trouble if it happened again. No matter how many times I told these people what was prohibited, they ignored me. I can talk about this now, since my former boss died, but I reconciled her credit card every month. She went on leave. Her daughter took the credit card out of the country and used it in Atlantic City. Worked for a car dealership as a teen. Sometimes ran a shuttle, other times went on quick trips to get parts from other dealerships. One time I had less than a half an hour to cover a good distance to get a part in time. My manager told me to take the shuttle and make it happen. Ended up going about 120 in the dealership shuttle that clearly had our name on it, going down a fairly major highway in the area. Worked for a restaurant, and one night the manager was partying with the owner's son after hours as I was leaving. The next morning I saw the manager a block away from the restaurant as I was coming in for my shift, and he asked me for a ride to his aunt's house. I told him I would be late if I did, but he told me not to worry about it. Walked into my shift about 30 minutes late. Just as the cops were leaving, the cook told me that my manager had gotten wasted the night before, trashed the walk-in freezer, and stolen some money. As I was setting up the bar, the owner walked up and asked why I was late. I told him what happened, and he asked me where I dropped the manager off. Something felt sketchy, so I was very vague about exactly where that was, and he walked off with his assistant. Come to find out a few months later that the restaurant was actually a front for a Mexican cartel, and the owner's assistant was a hitman. Was super glad I didn't tell them exactly where I dropped off my manager. Don't know which is worse, my manager asking me to help him get away from a crime scene, or the owner for asking me to rat on the manager so he could kill him. I worked as a temp in a production factory in between permanent jobs. I was on permanent 12-hour night shifts making plastic fuel cans. They also made chemical bottles too for bleach and other things. I had been on site for about 2 weeks. When I went out for a cigarette break, the guys in the unit next door were part of the same company, and as I was standing there I saw a guy hit the emergency stop button and open the safety gate to clear a blockage from the machine he was using. He cleared the blockage in the machine that shouldn't move once isolated decided to finish its cycle, which crushed the operator in the chest. I ran and managed to free him from the machine, hit the emergency button to let the night manager know there was a problem. The supervisor came in first and panicked and ran for the manager. When he came in I asked if they had called an ambulance. They looked at me like I was an alien and said we aren't allowed to call an ambulance because that could trigger a HSE visit. OSHA for you American folks. I told them I'd call one myself and get the HSE involved. The old guy who'd got hurt was in agony and having a lot of pain when breathing, and these a-holes didn't want to get him medical treatment. I called the ambulance myself, and as a qualified first responder I gave them the details of what I'd seen, and also told the paramedic about them not wanting to call the ambulance because of the HSE, health and safety executive. For anyone wondering, the old guy had 3 broken ribs and a flail, which is where a piece of rib is loose inside the chest cavity and potentially fatal. I gave the old guy my contact information in case he wanted to make a claim against the a-holes he worked for, and went home. I got a call the following day from the agency saying that the company didn't want me back on site. She asked me what had happened for them to say that, so I explained that an older guy had been crushed in a machine and they didn't want to call an ambulance for him, and I had to treat him because they had nobody qualified on site. She asked if she could call me back. She rang me a couple of hours later to tell me that they had pulled all of the agency staff out of there and she had ring the HSE herself, which was totally unexpected for an agency. The good news is that the old guy came through it okay. The company got a massive fine for the multiple breaches of HSE guidelines and shut down for 4 months, while the safety gear was brought up to an acceptable level.